a diagram of what it looks like. So you can have the, the cambium layer is here, the xylem is here. So you can see that that's how they have the different, here's the phloem right here. So the phloem is actually on the closer to the outside. And that makes sense because there's a lot of insects that like to feed on phloem, and it'd be hard for them to go all through all of this to get to the phloem if it was over here. They don't have to worry so hard on this one. On the other hand, when it's the spotted lanternfly, maybe that's not a good idea. Um, then I want to take a look real quick at some of the different types of trees that we are working with, and whether we want to go ahead and control them or not. Like for instance, if you've got a good stand of loblolly pine, you wouldn't necessarily want to have the Virginia pine, even though it's named after me. It's not a very strong tree. It's not a very long-lived tree, and it's not a good tree to use as a timber tree. Now, these are very old technology. All the cone-bearing trees are very old technology. For the most part, they were wind pollinated. It wasn't until insects became available on the earth that they decided to go ahead and help a little bit too. But mostly it's the wind and a few of the animals like deer, squirrels, and chipmunks. And there's a couple of birds I think that's pretty cool. But when you look at birds, they're kind of like miniature dinosaurs on the wing. Then you look at the roots of them, and most of the roots of the cone-bearing trees have a very strong taproot. That taproot is really important because these trees are very tall but very narrow for the most part. And in a forest, they kind of help hold each other up. I think by the roots, the roots kind of graft underground also, but even the tops kind of work together. They do have lateral and secondary roots. They'll have the fine roots in up near the surface, and the coarser roots are much deeper, of course, but still it is not the type of root system that a deciduous tree has. So, and that makes it easier to figure out how you can go ahead and take care of it. Here is kind of a diagram of the taproot of a pine tree. Very prominent taproot. The trees are growing in the native habitat in the deep sandy soil. That's typical of the Eastern Shore. And there's other roots too, but for the most part, you look at the taproot as what really works on that. When you're looking at soft and hardwood deciduous trees, this is ecologically the newer technology. Of course, it's still old technology, but ecologically, it's new technology. In this one, the seeds are not naked seeds. There are seeds that are covered. And in the maples, there are wings, samurai type things, but they're still covered. And so this can actually be eaten, but you'd have to break open the actual seed coat to get to it. And look at with the acorns. I mean, these are definitely something that a lot of the different forest critters eat, from the deer all the way down to the mice, but you have got to work hard to get that seed coat off of it. So these are disseminated by wind, but they're also carried around by a lot of the different animals, large and small, including people who used to eat them. And I imagine some people still do just for fun. When you're looking at the trees, the deciduous trees, they're a totally different root system than the pines do. But even the trees, even the deciduous trees have a different way of growing. Like for instance, with maples, they have a very, very fast growth. As soon as the roots are in the soil, that plant grows very, very strong, very fast to grow tall. And it branches out so that all the leaves are positioned to grab the sun. I think one of the heaviest shade you'll ever find is the shade of a maple tree. Oak trees, on the other hand, they spend the first 2 or 3 years developing a really strong root system, one that can go ahead and survive even if there's a fire. And but the branches are more, I think, wide. What's interesting about the roots, the taproot will develop first, and then once it is developed, it will go ahead and break out into becoming more of a diffuse root system. The other thing is the bark, instead of being thin like the maples, is a much thicker bark, more of a fire break in a sense. So the roots of deciduous trees, like I said, you have the taproot, and as it matures, it transforms into a very extensive root system. And you have a lot of secondary root systems also. And these can spread 3 to 7 times greater than the actual crown. So when I tell people that if they're going to fertilize a tree, they want to go ahead and plant, put the fertilizer out from beyond the drip line, and that kind of makes sense. All of these trees do form root grafts to a certain amount, and that's really important when you're thinking of controlling them and getting rid of the trees. The other thing is a lot of these trees, especially the deciduous trees, form very strong symbiotic relationships with mitochondria. Um, Mycorrhizae, I'm sorry, mycorrhizae is a beneficial fungi that sort of wraps around the roots, and then its extensive system is very, very fine, and it can actually find water in areas where that the actual roots of the trees can't, and it can find nutrients where the actual roots of the trees can't get to. So they pull in the water and the nutrients, and they share that with the roots of the trees, and all they ask in return is a little bit of sugar from the leaves. So I think it's a pretty good deal for them. But I also think that the trees are more able to actually communicate with each other, not only through the root grafts, but also through the mitochondria. Sorry, mycorrhiza. I can never pronounce that right. Sorry about that. Anyways, I found this really cool picture, and this to me is really a good photo drawing of what the roots look like on an oak tree, where you have the crown here and the strong root system. You have a taproot system, which doesn't go down too far. When you think about it, most of the roots are in the first 2 feet of soil, but then you have this root zone right here that comes all the way out, way past the drip line. So cone-bearing trees can be controlled a lot easier in terms of getting rid of them than deciduous trees for all those reasons. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit with biology again, is what the leaves do. They actually are the reason why the trees can go ahead and thrive, only having water and nutrients from the soil and carbon dioxide and water and sunlight outside. So sunlight and carbon dioxide work with the chloroplasts in the leaves, and they it turns into energy, which is sugar, and then they get rid of oxygen. Now, when I was a kid, I thought oxygen was for us, that the trees were making it for us. I was such a tree hugger at the age of 3 years old. I was like, oh, wow. And it wasn't until I actually studied botany in college I realized, oh, the trees are releasing the oxygen because the roots of the trees need oxygen, which is one reason why you find the roots within the first 2 feet of soil. Because you go any deeper than the first 2 to 3 feet of soil, is you're going to get less and less oxygen. And like I said, those roots need oxygen to breathe. So when you talk about water, water is also a very, very important ingredient in how things are growing. If you don't have a lot of water, you have to deal with only drought tolerant plants. And that would be maybe not so much trees. Although some trees are okay with it. Most trees need a little bit more water. The roots will always go ahead and search for it. And I love this picture right here because you can see just how far down those roots went and yet how wide they go out. So I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so the bark. Now, bark is really important because bark on a tree is like the skin on people, and it is the protection of the tree. But if you decide you've got to get rid of certain trees, let's say you have some tree of heaven and you decide, okay, let's get rid of this one. And you've decided you're not going to use any different chemicals. One of the best things to do that will really, really work is going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. You'll build up some muscles, but you're going to have to do what's called girdling. And springtime, when the cambium layer is the most vulnerable because the trees have not come out in leaf, but they're ready to. Everything is kind of like poised to run. It's kind of like people who are running a race. They're on the start line and they're just ready for that pistol to go off and they can just take off running. So what you have to do is you have to cut the bark all around the tree, and not just cut the bark off. You have to cut into the actual tree because you want to cut into the cambium layer. Remember, the cambium layer has the phloem and the xylem. The xylem has got the water from and nutrients, the xylem up, and phloem has all the sugars that flow down. So xylem up and phloem down. If you don't cut into the cambium layer all the way around, then that tree, because trees are survivors just like we are, is going to find a way to go ahead and heal that part. And even if it can get just some of it healed, it will go ahead and be able to come out and leaf. So you really have got to go ahead and cut not only into the cambium layer, you have to go all the way through into the xylem layer. That way, your roots cannot receive any of the sugars from the leaves. Now the leaves are already formed this time of year, and they're just ready and waiting for the temperatures to warm up enough for those bud scars to just drop off and those leaves to unfurl and pull in the sunshine. And they'll do that. But then they're going to rely on the water that the roots usually give them so that they can continue to grow. And that water is not going to be available. So the top of the tree is slowly going to die. And the roots, even though they can pull in water and nutrients, they cannot survive without the sugars. So it is not a quick death, but it is a certain death. So basically, tree girdling keeps the water from the leaves and keeps the sugar from the roots. Just perfectly simple like that. Okay, so I did say most of the roots are found between 6 and 18 inches below. I say 2 feet. But what I think is pretty interesting, and 25% of the plants are roots, and they work really hard. So we have to be able to kind of work around the fact that we want to keep them from working with things. So what they'll do is if they notice that, oh my gosh, all of a sudden I'm not getting sugar from my leaves, well, what can I do? Sometimes they will have an area that will develop a water sprout or a sucker. And once they realize, oh my gosh, I don't have anything, but I have all this water, and they can go ahead and get that little bit of greenery that's attached to that root, it will push up that sucker very, very quickly. They'll quickly form leaves, poof, that plant will continue to grow. It has all that humongous root system and only a few little suckers, but those suckers will grow like crazy. So as soon as you've done the girdling, you have to keep an eye on the trees. And if you see any of the suckers, and sometimes they're also called water sprouts, you have to remove them as soon as you see them. So this is not just a one and done. And actually, when you think about integrated pest management, it is never a one and done. You always have to come back and double check to see what's going on. How is it working? So you'd have to recruise and take a look, see what's going on, remove the suckers. And at this point, you don't want to just cut them off of the tree. You want to cut them off of the root as well. If you can cut it down below the ground, that's even better, because at that point, you're cutting out the root. The other thing that you have to remember is trees form neighborhoods because they do have these root grafts. And the mycorrhizae, like I was mentioning, I love this picture right here because they have a European beech and a Norway spruce. I was listening to a TED talk, I guess it was yesterday. And this lady had done she's a forester, and she had worked really hard to figure out how trees communicate with each other. And the mycorrhizae fungi plays a huge part in allowing these trees to communicate with each other and also heal each other too. They can send carbon from one to the other. Pretty interesting. So that's why you have to really remove this stump if you can. So if you're only going to girdle it and let it die, you're going to have to watch out for those water sprouts. But if you can cut the tree down and grind the roots and grind the stump down and remove the roots, you might not have to worry about any suckers. Okay, so some of the other things you can do. Well, once the tree is cut down, let's say you don't have the ability to grind it because grinders are kind of pricey, or you just don't have access to it, then you can go ahead and put about 2 inches of mulch over top. And the wood chips from the tree could be used as that. Just put it through a chipper and then you've got all that mulch. Or wood bark mulch. Why buy something when you already have this tree that's already cut down? If you're only going to use part of it, you're still going to go ahead and have a wood chipper, and that will give you an awful lot of mulch. How does it work? Well, first of all, the mulch basically smothers all of the growing parts of the tree. Any part of the tree that would think, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start growing. If it's under 2 inches of mulch, there's no sunshine that will encourage it to continue to grow. And the other thing is the mulch keeps the soil, the stump kind of moist, which means that it can go ahead and possibly start to rot down. Okay, then I was looking at a different way. This is an old one that I have heard of many, many times. Once a tree is cut down, you can go ahead and drill holes into the stump. And then you could put about maybe a half a cup, depending on how large the stump is, a half a cup for the whole tree. and just pour some 10-10-10 fertilizer carefully into the holes and then cover that with mulch. Now, how that works is the fertilizer is a type of salt, and salts have a tendency to dry the trees out. If you put down fertilizer and it's a drought, that can actually burn the plants. And so I'm telling everybody, in the landscape business now, in a drought, don't fertilize, just, and sometimes it's best not to water things unless it's a special plant that you've really got to keep watered. You don't want them to turn into water junkies. But in a forested area, if you add the fertilizer in through the holes like that, that will start helping basically dry the tree out from the inside out. Another thing you can do, you can cut the stump down and you can make the holes again as before and add Epsom salts. Now, Epsom salts are really not salts. It's magnesium and sulfur and oxygen put together. But again, it does the same thing. It pulls the water out of the stump and it dries the stump out. And once that happens, it's kind of like it's like a no return sort of thing. Then there's the fun thing called thermal weed control. Last year, I asked for my birthday to have a flamethrower so I could go ahead and control the weeds. And the first thing I found out about it is you've got to be able to use it on a day that's not really, really windy. And that's kind of difficult sometimes on the Eastern Shore. Other places in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, maybe not so much. But where I am, I have to be very, very careful because you don't want to set anything else on fire. Flaming uses a propane fueled torch that can get the temperatures up to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. 212 is Fahrenheit is the temperature when water can boil. And so when you pour that on as a flame onto the plants, and you don't have to hold it to the plants, you can just basically touch the plants. It depends on whether you're doing trying to control seedlings or a more mature perennial. But for the most part, you just basically pull the flame just across it. You don't have to hold it anywhere. And what happens is the water in the plant cells actually goes into a boil. And anytime something boils, it actually expands and the cell walls break down and then eventually the leaves wilt and die. It's kind of like the reverse of freezing because freezing also expands and causes the same kind of death. But this one is easier to work with in a sense. So here's a really cool machine that some people have been using to use for farmers who are growing organically. And they found out that they like the fact that it's a clean burning fuel and that it's non-toxic and it doesn't contaminate the groundwater. But they found that when they went ahead and used it in the evening, it was a lot easier to see what was burning and where it was burning. So you could go ahead and keep your fire extinguisher close by. So let's see now, the flame weeding will go ahead and do seedlings. I think once you get a woody or herbaceous perennial over a year, you'd have to do a little bit more. But I think this would probably be a good way to help control some of those suckers also. Definitely the annual weeds. But this is, again, you'd have to keep going back to make sure that you're controlling all of them. Like anything, when you're looking at different plants, every plant has a different way of dealing with flame than others. Plants that actually are used to dealing with fires like those out past the Mississippi, out west of the Mississippi, where they have I would say, I will go with California because we've had so many of them there in California. They're used to having the flames, but their growing tip is actually below the ground. Just kind of like violets are, the growing tip is below the ground. And it's really difficult to control a violet with an herbicide because herbicide just doesn't touch the growing point, neither would the flame. So you have to figure out which plants will respond better with the flame and which ones won't. So again, you have to figure out the size of the weeds, and we're going to call these weed trees weeds. The stage of growth. I mean, the best time to control them would be in the springtime when things are just starting up so that you can go ahead and get rid of that reserve so that the roots will start to starve to death. This is definitely organic control. And I think that this is a good tool in the toolbox. Again, things to consider, well, flames can get out of control. So again, evening is a good time to use it. And I already mentioned that plants respond differently to flaming. So you have to kind of figure out which ones are going to do well with yours. I got a lot of this information and some of the photos from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So I wanted to give them a shout out because it was a pretty cool article I read. Then there's steaming. And I thought that this was interesting because I do know that there's some people who are using steaming, which is basically hot water that has been turned into steam instead of flaming, because first of all, it gives water and it's not something that's going to cause anything to catch on fire. So the reason why they like to use steam is that water is an excellent carrier of heat, obviously less chance of getting a fire out of control. The other thing that's kind of interesting is when you hit the growing part of the weed or the tree, when it's really close to the ground, it will actually transfer down into the root system, which is pretty cool. So it's, in some cases, the steam can actually kill the underground growing points of the plant. And that's what you'd want, something that would be easy for that. So here's a picture of what the steamer looks like. And then there's the hot water. And what they decided to do with hot water is they thought that they would be able to control it better, be more pinpoint accuracy. So that you have a thin stream of extremely hot water, and they spray it on the crown of the seedling or the weed from the top to the bottom. So you start at the top and go to the bottom. And then again, when you get to the bottom, that actually goes all the way down into the root system too.
So great. Thank you. That was very interesting, Ginny. We appreciate that. There are some questions in the Q&A, so y'all keep putting your questions in the Q&A. We're going to have Kaitlin come in, and she's going to share her screen and talk. Ginny, that was great.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
That was great. So Ginny's going to stick around while Kaitlin gets her screen up.
Can everybody see that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. I'm really excited to be here tonight talking about goats, the cutest form of invasive plant management. My name is Kaitlin DeWitt. I'm the Forest Health Specialist with the Virginia Department of Forestry. I am one half of the Forest Health team for the state of Virginia. And together, Lori and I, we run the state looking for forest pest disturbances such as insects, diseases, and a lot of times working with invasive plant control as well. So I'm not actually going to give you guys the history of goats as an animal, but just goats for vegetation management. They've been used for over 100 years. They've been really well utilized for invasive plant management and just vegetation management in general because of their ability to work in different areas or areas that are overgrown. They're also resistant to many plant toxins and plants with anti-nutritive factors. This is because they're able to eat plants that many other livestock like cattle and sheep and things like that won't and cannot eat, such as thorny plants or plants that might be poisonous to other livestock animals. They just are really great at breaking these things down. They also will consume seeding stems, which is important because they usually consume these stems at the immature stage. And so the seeds won't actually survive the digestive tract. So it's not like you have to worry about them eating the seeds and then pooping them out and having the plant, grow even better. And then also they're considered low input animals because they require low investment for startup. They're considered low maintenance, and oftentimes people will say that they can get their money out of them by utilizing them after they consume for meat. So they've got a wide variety of uses, and they've been used extensively out west. So there's many studies that show them controlling invasive plants like Mycorrhiza, reducing fire fuel loads in areas that are high risk for wildfires, and also controlling understory plants and managed timber stands. There's lots of examples of this. You can do a quick Google search and see this. They're also utilized because of their flexible dietary habits that allow them to change from browse to grass to woody plants. And they will eat anything and everything. So they start with their favorite, and then they'll eat the rest as Basically, they eat anything and everything. They have been used for many reasons. They're great. And if you guys want to read more, this paper right here is an excellent resource for it. I would recommend it. So from the Virginia Department of Forestry's perspective, we get a lot of questions from landowners around the state asking about other forms of invasive plant management. Many landowners, they're not comfortable having chemical herbicides applied on their land, or they just want to find ways that they can utilize kind of an integrated pest management approach. And so Lori and I decided that we wanted to try and study goats because we've had people ask about them. So in spring of 2019, we found an area at one of our state forests, Lesane State Forest in Nelson County. We found a 4-acre section of this forest that we divided into 3 sections. And we were able to do this project through a U.S. Forest Service grant-funded project for invasive plant control. So just to show you a little bit about Lesane and why we chose it, here's Lori next to a giant bush of multiflora rose. And also you can just see how overgrown and densely vegetated the entire area was. And so we thought it would make a really great spot for us to do this goat study. So just to make it a little more official, though not, truly scientific, we identified 2 plots within each of the 3 sections, and we utilized forest inventory and analysis, 24-foot radius subplots with an ocular estimation of all of the invasive plants within that 24-foot subplot. And with that, we broke them down into different classes. And so we used less than 1%, 1 to 10%, 11 to 50%, 51 to 90, and 91 to 100. And so within that plot, we imagined that there was a cylinder coming down, and we visualized the amount of invasive plants with each of these different classes. And throughout our 4-acre stand, we had a plethora of invasives, but mostly we had Oriental bittersweet, multiflora rose, tree of heaven, and garlic mustard, which were pretty much widespread throughout. Additionally, we also measured every native tree that was greater than 4 inches in diameter, just so we could know what could potentially be a seed source once the goats came in and cleared out the understory for regeneration. So this is our area with the 3 plots. You can see it kind of looks like a little fat pie wedge. And then within each, the little green dots represent where we had our subplots for the vegetation measurements. So each of the plots had goats graze in each of them. And then in plot 1, we wanted to see what would happen after the first round of grazing if we had goats come back in at the end of the season and graze again. In plot 2, we wanted to see what happened after the initial goat grazing event where no management follow-up was done. And then in plot 3, we wanted to see what happened when you added herbicide application after the goats came in and cleared everything out. So you could see we kind of had 3 different study areas that we were trying just to see what would happen. So 90 Kiko goats, which are a New Zealand breed of goats that are considered to be especially hardy, they were released for a 2-week period in May. And they were out there just doing their thing, eating through all 3 of those sections. And then we brought the second round of goats just into section 1, the first week of August. There are 2 guard dogs, 2 Anatolian shepherds that live with the herd as protective animals. They live with them full time, and they are very sweet, but they, will go after a coyote or anything that might try and come and get the goats. And then we followed up in section 3 with the herbicide treatment in August. And with that, they did a cut stump. We had an applicator come and do that. That was not something that we did. And they came and did a cut stump and hack and squirt treatment with triclopyr. And then they did foliar treatments also with triclopyr. And so that was what they did to follow up. So this is a video. I am not going to play it because last time it crashed my Zoom, but it will be shared with all of you later. So sorry you can't see that, but it's just a bunch of the goats in action eating everything and anything in sight. So just to show you guys kind of what these plots are looking like, throughout the 3 sections, even though we divided them up into 3 different treatments, that's what our goat herder would have done anyways, because he wants to have intense grazing pressure in an area, so that way they're not just eating their favorite plants and leaving the rest. So he would have broken the area up into smaller sections anyways, but he, for us, broke it up into the 3 plots that we wanted. So in this image on the left, you can see the electric fence running through on the line between 2 of the plots. And on the left of that fence, you can see how open the understory is. And really all that's left are the big trees that were in the stand. And then on the right of the electric fence, you can see that's what the plot looked like prior to the goats grazing. So they really are coming in and clearing out everything. And all that's left are kind of the woody stems that the goats haven't consumed. The image on the right, again, just shows you how clear the goats can get the understory. They eat everything that they can reach, even when standing on their hind end. And then also the goat herder with the company that we hired, he would go in kind of towards the end and he would cut down anything the goats couldn't reach that was an undesirable species. And that way they could continue to graze the crown or anything that they couldn't reach from just standing on their legs. So it looks a little messy with some of the debris in there, but still it looks a lot better than kind of that dense woody understory and overstocked area that we had before. So again, this is another image. It's just, I really like to show, this is taken 1 month after the second goat grazing in plot 1. So I'm standing in the middle of where the fence line was. It looks like a trail, but that's where the fence was. And this was taken at the beginning of September. On the right is plot 1. So that is about a few weeks after the second round of goat grazing. You can see some things are coming back. Some things were untouched by the goats. And then you can see on the left in plot 2, which was just grazed by goats in May, had started to really come back because there was no follow-up treatment done. So that's a big consideration if you want to utilize goats, is that, you know, you need to have some sort of follow-up treatment, because ultimately everything will come back that wasn't fully eaten all the way down. This is our 3rd plot where the herbicide was applied. And you can see again that everything really opened up a lot. We had a lot of ailanthus in this stand. And so a lot of them did get cut down. You can see in that image on the left, there's some stumps that they did a cut stump application. And so what you're seeing that's green, it looks like there's a lot of green, but what that is actually a lot of spice bush coming back. Some people would consider that an undesirable species, but since it's native, we considered it fine. But so you can see that really everything that's left are our native trees that we wanted to keep around, and then the spice bush that's coming back. So the herbicide application was very effective post-goat. And also one of the comments that the contractor that was applying the herbicides mentioned to us with his team was that it was the easiest stand for herbicide application that he had ever walked through. And it was really nice because it allowed for more targeted and direct approach to the treatment, because he could actually see what species he wanted to treat and do the foliar sprays and do the hack and squirt and that sort of thing. So he said it was much easier, and you could actually see where he was walking and he wasn't just spraying herbicides out there. We had a little bit of funding left in our grant, and so we wanted to try again with the goats at another state forest. And so we took them to Paul State Forest, which is in Rockingham County, Virginia. So this is Paul State Forest. It is considered a kind of oasis of forest land amongst a bunch of farmland in Virginia. It's heavily industrialized or heavily farmed for cattle and chickens and that sort of thing. And so it is very well used by people that want to come out and go hiking. And so this area at the bottom where the star is, that's where we put the goats. And I'll tell you a little bit why we put that area. So that area that we chose to put the goats in at Paul, this is at the back of the state forest. And we did that because since it is so well used by people hiking, we kind of wanted to keep it away from the public. So that way there wasn't a lot of interaction with the goats. And also it was a demonstration area where some of our forest researchers at Virginia Department of Forestry had done some harvest demonstration sites. And so they did a clear cut, which is what's on the right. And then they also did some timber stand improvement cuts where they just left some really nice mature oaks and then let the understory kind of open up. Additionally, we chose this area because you have to have access to get the goats to your land, which is something that's an important consideration. And obviously our goat herder couldn't back his giant gooseneck trailer with, you know, almost 100 goats all the way up our hiking trail. So we were very fortunate to have this house on the left help let us use their driveway. And so for this one, we didn't do as formal of a study. We just had 2 sections and we kind of divided it at the cutoff where the cutover was. And that's because the cutover area was heavily overgrown. It was just left to come back on its own. So it was mainly Ailanthus and some other gnarly species as well. And then also because it just was a nice kind of break, they were able to move through the more mature forest on their own. So that's the Paul State Forest. These are some of the after photos of the goats. And so the image on the left shows what the Ailanthus and the cutover looked like. You can see it's completely clear. The goats did a great job in this section. These woody stems that you see here are Ailanthus that we had another herbicide applicator do basal bark sprays on. So those will also be killed. And so this area is now nice and wide open and it looks really, really great. The image on the right is in the timber stand improvement area. You can see there's still some green. It looks a little more open, but a lot of that green that you're seeing is actually the Japanese stilt grass, which for some reason the goats weren't a huge fan of. And so they did seem to leave that. I don't know exactly why. But they still opened it up a fair amount in this other area. But we were very pleased with the look of the cutover. And the plans for this are now also to try and follow up with some fire and see how that is used as a control method as well. So some pros and cons for using goats. Pros, it's a great way to start fresh. I would absolutely recommend this to anybody that has an area where, you know, it's very out of control. You don't even know where to begin really. So that would be a really great use for this. And again, it allows for a more targeted approach for herbicide treatment. So if you don't mind using herbicide on your property, but you want to make sure you're using it in the best way possible, this is another great way for you to know that you're exactly hitting the plant that you want to hit and maybe not having some non-target effects. They're also great for hard to reach areas. They're very hardy, you know, they can climb on rocks, they can do all these things. So if there's an area that you might not want to try and, you know, bring your backpack sprayer and spray that way, goats will be a great way to get in and really clean that up. Finally, they're considered ecotainment, which is a term that our goat herder called the goats, which I really appreciated. Is mainly just that they're entertaining to watch, they're cute to look at, and they're doing a great job. Some cons, they eat everything. You know, this would not be something that I would probably recommend if you have some sensitive ecosystems or some rare plants on your property, because goats are not discriminatory. You know, we had a lot of undesirable species, but we also had some ash regeneration, some sassafras, things like that that were coming up that we did lose, you know, initially once the goats came and ate everything. There's no silver bullet. So, you know, this isn't going to be a one-time fix where all of your invasive plant woes go away. You will have to do some sort of treatment, maybe some of the tactics that Jenny just covered, or some herbicide application. The other thing is that it is fairly expensive to have a goat applicator like we use come out. We found that for the Paul State Forest, it averaged a little over $1,000 an acre. At Lasagne State Forest, it was under $1,000 an acre, but that's just because the applicator was closer to that state forest than he was to Paul State Forest. So people ask why it's so expensive. So I will say that we paid for what we consider the gold star treatment for the goats. We had them do everything from start to finish. You can reduce some of the cost for these goat applicators if you can clear the fence line yourself, if you can go out and feed the guard dogs, if you can walk the fence line while the goats are grazing, because all of these things need to be done once a day. The dogs need to be fed. You need to check the fence line to make sure a branch didn't fall on it, or, you know, something, a deer didn't go crashing through it. And so most of the money is in the labor cost. You know, they charge a per hour labor for their services for them to go out and do all of this. And so I think some of the costs can be reduced if you're willing to go out and do this on your own. Also, the follow-up treatment costs, you know, there is a cost for these herbicide applicators coming out. This is, again, something that you can do on your own if you have the means. But for our 1 acre section at Lassane, it was, you know, a couple $1,000s. And then for the 6 acres of treatment at Paul, again, it was about $4,500 for that. So there is a cost associated with it. It's not going to be maybe the cheapest option for you to control plants on your land, but it is very effective. And so I guess the big takeaway, what about the invasive plants at these forests? Obviously, as we expected, the goat herbicide plot had the greatest reduction in non-desirable plants, and it looks the cleanest, and it still looks the cleanest even a year out. Multiflora rose was a favorite amongst the goats. Our goat herder, he called it goat candy, because that's the thing that they will go for the most once they're out in grazing these areas. Again, the stilt grass was largely left alone. I'm not entirely sure why, but they just didn't seem to want to touch it for some reason. Maybe there were still plenty of other things that they'd want to eat. But a positive was that we did have native regeneration after the grazing. You know, we went back to the site at Lassane and we were seeing a lot of ash, which has its own problem, but it's still a good a good seedling that we wanted to see up. We had a lot of sassafras coming up, again, spice bush. You know, it's been what we had started. And so that was encouraging to us. So in summary, goats are effective. They eat everything and anything in sight. You will have to do some follow-up treatment, whatever it is, if it's, you know, herbicide or maybe some mechanical control. Something will need to be done, or else your money and your cute goat ecotainment, you know, will kind of maybe be for nothing, although it looks better. And I think it really is a great tool to start fresh and can really help you treat your other treatment efforts you decide to do. But do know it can be pricey if you're having an applicator or a contractor that has the goats come out. But if this is something that, you know, you think is worth the money, I think it's an excellent way to control plants. So if you want to learn more about this, we wrote a little article about it in our annual forest health review last year. You can find that on the DOF website. I think Joe's also going to put a link to that in the chat at some point. And we also wrote a little blog post on the Virginia Department of Forestry blog, if you want to read about it. And as always, like, you know, here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out with questions. I'm going to try and send that video out to you guys. I'm sorry it wouldn't play tonight, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that you guys might have about goats. So hopefully you could hear the rest of that and there were no more technical glitches. I'm sorry.
You're good, Kaitlin. That was great. Thank you for a little bit of ecotainment there. That was great. both Ginny and Kaitlin did a great job ecotaining us. So Ginny and Kaitlin, if you want to pop in here, let's have a conversation with some of these questions. I can't see you here. Oh, there you, okay. So you guys are down a bit. I don't know if you want to turn your camera on if you want, if you feel comfortable. But the first question is, what about girdling when tree shoots are elongating? I've heard that root systems reserves are lowest at that point, and so effectiveness will be greater. What about girdling when tree shoots are elongating? Ginny, thoughts?
I think that would probably be a good time also. I think at any time between the time that the tree is first starting to have those leaves emerge to the point that they're starting to elongate, because at that point they're already committed. The tree is in active motion. And if there's no water, it's just like, oh no, you know, it's like, you know, you're running a marathon and where's the water person with your bottle of water?
Okay, good advice.
Mhm.
Does flaming require kind of permitting or coordination with any agencies, like a controlled burn might?
Um, I have never heard about that. And when I read that, I thought, ooh, I know when we have control burns in the county, we have to call the fire control people first and tell them, what we're doing and what we're burning. And then we have to call them when we're done and the fire is out. Um, it might not be a bad idea to call and say that you're going to have it is a controlled burn, so it might not be a bad idea to do that just to get people aware of it. You always want to make sure that you have good control. I remember doing an experiment at Lesrac one time, and we were just, basically flaming little seedlings and all that, but we had added a straw mulch, and all we had were 2 glasses of water that we were drinking because it was July. And I said, I think we have a fire. And the girl who was doing the flaming she's having so much fun. I said, turn it off. We have a fire behind you. She turned around like, oh my God. You don't want to do that.
So better safe than sorry. Let's contact our county agencies to find out what we need. I hear what you're saying. Better safe and have more than 2 glasses of water with you.
Yes.
Maybe
Be
have
prepared.
yes, have a little water tank with you there. Okay, so goat question here. When goats are used, what happens to the seed bank in the soil? You kind of touched on that a little bit, Kaitlin.
Yeah, I think any seeds that might still be in the soil, they can still germinate and come out once the goats are gone. But anything that might be a seeding plant, the goats will eat and it won't survive the digestive tract. So it's not like you have to worry about it having kind of like built-in fertilizer when it comes out the back end. But obviously they're not able to do anything below ground while they're grazing because they're just eating any of the foliage that's on the plants themselves.
The seeds that are already under the ground are safe, but the ones that go in the goat's mouth and out there behind, we don't need to worry. They're not.
No. No, those should be good to go. Like, no, not going to germinate probably, hopefully.
What did you guys find? So how have you guys heard, how do goats do with Chinese barberry control?
So we had a little bit of that at Lassane, not a ton. And they ate it, like it wasn't there when we went back out to check on things post goat. So they seem to eat it. And like I said, they can eat anything with thorns. Like they loved multiflora rose, blackberry. They were just able to chow down on all of it. I guess something with their tongue, it's very thick. I don't know how they do it, honestly, because we were getting torn up just walking through it and they were able to walk and eat and everything. So I think with barberry, I don't know if it was like a whole area of barberry, but they ate it at our Lassane site, which when we didn't have a ton of it, but.
I will say tonight I'm learning a new language. I'm ecotainment, and we got post goat, and there was another term. So we're getting a good education here, learning some new stuff.
We kind of just made up our own language with this project, and we called the project name was originally Goat Palooza, just because we were like, this is a fun project. We need to like have some fun with it.
Well, it sounded like it was fun, and you learned a lot, and we appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
A question here, how often are the goats rotated? Also, also, were the goats kept where were the goats kept on the off hours? So are they working 9 to 5? How often were they rotated? What are they doing there? You mentioned stuff about feeding and the guard dog. So very interesting.
Yeah. So they're rotated just kind of as they finish through a section. So I mentioned that they like to keep them in small areas, despite how big of the area, if you were grazing 80 acres or a half acre, they want to put intense grazing pressure in that area. And so they're going to keep them there until they've pretty much eaten everything that they can reach that's green and leafy that they'll touch. So for us in our 4-acre section, it was about 12 or 13 days that they were in that area. So they move fast. And so it's, every couple of days he was going out and then up, move them to the next section. They'd eat all of that. He'd put the fence line up, move them to that section. So they don't work 9 to 5. I found out that they will feed continuously throughout the 24 hours. And so they'll all eat together for a few hours at a time. And then they kind of take like a group nap, and then they sleep for a little bit and digest, and then they wake back up, and then they all go out again together and graze for another couple hours. So they kind of have these alternating eat sleep cycles, which is kind of nice, honestly.
Sounds like a vacation. Hey, eat and sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was pretty cool. And in terms of the feeding, I mean, you're not feeding them, they're feeding themselves and all your plants. It's really just the guard dogs that get fed once a day. And so that's something that, you know, if this was on your own property, you could do. It's not something that Lori and I could do because each of these state forests was about an hour away. And we had other things going on. And so that's why we just paid the contractor to go out and feed the dogs and walk the fence line every day.
So you said that I'm picturing that pie shape, you know, the 3 slices in your pie.
Yeah.
So 100 goats were in the one of the 3. So you had 100 goats. So what size was that? And like that's a lot. Like you said, this intensive. So what if we wanted to cut our costs and only have 50 of them? Would that, like, do they do kind of like a land to goat ratio type of thing, or?
Yeah. So we had like the 100, and each of those kind of pie slices was a little over an acre in size. And so the 100 goats went through that in, you know, a couple days. Now, if you just wanted it in your property, which was like 2 acres, depending on the size of your property and other projects that they have going on, they will adjust the herd size based on that. So might not always get 100.
Okay, so I just lost our, do goats respond to low, cheap electric fence, or does it need to be temporary 4-inch wire?
That I'm not positive about. I know that they do respect the electric fence. They teach them, I guess, like from a very young age. The babies were out with the moms while they were grazing, which was very cute. And they learned very quickly about the electric fence. I don't know the exact like voltage that our fence was. But I imagine you'd probably want it to be decent so that way you don't lose your herd.
Well, and hey, if they go through all those thorns and stuff, yeah, it is kind of an interesting thing. How much of a zap do they need if they're that tough? You
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So Kaitlin, when you get a minute, people are wondering what the title of the article you mentioned. You know, you said the one from out west.
Yeah. I can send that to you guys. Or I can read it to you guys. I can put it in the chat box in a minute if you want. And then
That'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And if we don't get it in the chat box, Caitlin's already going to send us the video to email you guys. So no worries there. Do the goats eat autumn olive, barberry, mahona, and other such invasives? Did I say that right? Mahona?
I don't know what that is, but I imagine they would eat it. They definitely eat autumn olive and barberry. And like I said, the only thing that I really didn't see them eat was Japanese silkgrass. And I don't know why, if that was a one-off. If anybody has other goat experience and they've seen them eat silkgrass, like, please correct me. But for some reason at Paul, they did not like it.
What did you guys decide to do then? If they ate all that other vegetation and you had this, was that one of the plots? Oh, it was at Paul. So there was no herbicide application?
No, we did have a contractor come out. And so we just did a foliar spray of the stilt grass out there. So it still got treated, but just not by the goats.
Okay. Goat question. Do the goats commute to the site every day, or do they camp out at site until finished? You know, I heard they're not working a 9 to 5. They're working 4 hours. So
they work a long time. No, they did not commute. There's no cute little goat school bus. They lived out there until the job was done. And so I don't think that our contractor would want to drive his big trailer down our windy mountain roads to the state forest every day. So yeah, they lived there the full 2 weeks, and then they were off to the next job. They know what they're doing.
Great. Any note on, Japanese knotweed? Are they eating Japanese knotweed, these goats?
again, I would imagine, I didn't identify any at either of these forests, but I would imagine that they would.
Yeah, those of you that are listening out there that haven't had experience with goats and knotweed, if you want to put that in the chat, that'd be great. What follow-up do you think will be needed to maintain natives versus exotics post-treatment? So you touched on that a little bit about you went in and sprayed that Japanese stealth grass, but can you offer any other follow-up post-goat actions?
Yeah. So we're definitely going to keep our eyes on both sites and go out at least once a year and check on how things are going. I think we'll just continue with some follow-up herbicide treatment. And then I think I mentioned that at Paul, we're going to try a fire. We were hoping to do that this spring, but we didn't get the exemption in time before fire season. So maybe this fall, if not next spring, do a fire out there and hopefully encourage some native regeneration that way as well. There's a really nice, hopefully seed bank. There's a lot of nice parent trees out there for some big white oaks and some things like that. And so I'm hoping that we can get some of that regeneration occurring.
Great. So the follow-ups may come in with some of those links that you sent. You said you were in that article. So maybe some of the follow-up will we can follow you along with some of the things, some of the links that you sent. That'd be nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so this was a question. Any studies done comparing effectiveness of different types of goats? Because you guys use that, what was the goat type of goat?
They're Kiko goats. So I'm sure that there are differences in the types of goats. This is just what the contractor that we had, that's what he chose and was happy with and thought was a nice hardy breed. I think there's some kind of, I don't know the exact breed name, but I think there's like an African goat that's also pretty sturdy that people are using. But I think, if you go with a contractor, you're just going to get what goats they think are the best.
Now, I think Julianne has something to say. I saw it in the chat. Julianne, if you want to pop in here, talk about the goats that.
Well, I once had a 4-acre wetland, and this I had owned with my ex-husband, and he did not want to use any chemical means, and it was just overrun with multiflora and such. And so when he did the research, it turned out it was the Angora goat.
Mm-hmm.
She is a very lovely breed. It's kind of hard to find. We only found one breeder in Pennsylvania. And you could also sell the wool then too. And so these goats did a good job on our wetland. And then we donated them to the Wildlands Conservancy, where they were a hit for a long time.
Oh, great.
They're quite effective. I can say that much.
I've heard good things about that breed. Yeah.
Great.
They're all cute.
Yeah.
How about goat contractors in South Central PA? Julianne, maybe, is there a site that has them all listed? Now, Julianne mentioned she found a goat breeder in Pennsylvania. I'm not too sure how they found.
I went through the 4-H goat clubs that most counties have. It's the sheep and goat clubs. That was the most effective. I do not know about a goat contracting. You can try Googling it. And I just had answered one of the questions. Here we go, eco goats. Dave Jackson knows of one. But several of my municipalities had, one is Milbourne Borough, and I was going to have the person call that to see which outfit that they had used.
I love that 4-H connection there. Way to incorporate youth in natural resource management, and goat showing, animal husbandry. I think that's great, Julianne. Way to be creative and thinking outside of the box there. Good one. Good one. Okay, what is the source of water for both the dogs and the goats? Would that be part of the cost factor? Good call. What are they doing?
Yeah, they had a little water trough out there, and that was another thing that they checked daily. They would just bring it in with them. We did have a stream at Lassane that we were willing to pull or route water from, but they didn't need it. They were used to just they had a tank in the back of their truck that they used to fill the water trough, and so they just checked that daily.
Great. Okay. What? Oh, there's the was.
Somebody had asked me, I guess it was in the chat, about the tree of heaven. And they are so right. You cannot do a girdle without any chemicals on the tree of heaven, because you'll go from one tree of heaven to a huge grove of tree of heaven, because it all sprouts up from all the different nodes in the roots. And that's not what you want to do. But I was trying to consider everything but the tree of heaven. I was pretending that that wasn't there.
We're all tired of tree of heaven for sure.
Oh my gosh. And the spotted lantern fly.
Yeah, definitely.
We're getting word in here that they are eating that knotweed.
Okay, cool.
Was the goat contractor Girdling, who owns Goat Busters? Do you have a list of contractors that do you have a list of contractors that may offer the services? So this is kind of about the same question. Goat Busters.
Yeah, so we used Goat Busters, which is one of the best names for a company ever. And Jace was great, and he was, just really great answering all my questions. I had a million questions for him as we were planning this. We chose him because he was close to both state forests and willing to come out and do all that work for us every day. There's another one in Virginia. I think it's called RVA Goats. But I unfortunately don't have a list of contractors that may offer the service for this. I would just suggest a Google search in your area. Some of them are willing to travel, especially if you're willing to pay, I don't know how far they'd be willing to travel, but I think Jace mentioned at one point he went to Alabama for a trip. So I think they'll be willing to do it if you want to have them come out.
Wow. So I'm reading here that the Nigerian dwarf goats are good too. And it looks like we're rounding up. I guess, Ginny, maybe you answered some of your questions online there in the typing. So I appreciate that. But we're going on to our last question here, folks. If you have any other questions you want to add in the Q&A, please feel free. We're going to be here. So last question. Would goats eat cattails in a basin area? I think they look like hot dogs.
They do. Hot dogs on a stick for sure. I don't know, because there's not like a lot of foliage on the cattails. So I wouldn't say no, but I also I don't know. It's a good question.
Interesting. I wonder if they would eat Phragmites too. Like, do they like getting their feet wet? Like, interesting to think about. I like how this person went to like the water part of everything. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure about some of those. I know like they've done projects in some of the areas along like riverbanks and stuff, but I don't know if they had any cattails or anything on that. So I think I don't know if they actually were getting in the water with those or just like on the side of the water, but yeah, I don't know.
Okay, one other question did come up, and this is an interesting cost benefit analysis if we want to think about the goats. You said for the gold package, it was $1,000 an acre ish. And then, so comparing a herd of goats to a forestry mulcher that's going to come in and kind of just take that out. What's your opinion on either or?
I mean, I think both are great ways to just start fresh, kind of scorched earth. I think the forestry mulcher might be a little bit more destructive, like you're just kind of taking everything all the way out. The goats are just reducing some of the vegetation, some of the ability to photosynthesize, knocking the plants back that way, really opening things up. So I think maybe if you had like a really horrible site that was maybe just all multiflora rose or all ailanthus or something like that, maybe a forestry mulcher would be just a good way to go in. I think since we still had some desirable species that we wanted to try and keep around, maybe the goats were a better way. And then I saw in the chat someone put the goats are way cuter, so that is true too.
That's that ecotainment, right?
Yeah, go out and go see how cute the goats are. Hear the little bleeps or baas, whatever they are.
What about purple loosestrife? Do you think they'd eat purple loosestrife? They're pretty. I'd eat them.
Maybe You can really only speak to like the plants that we saw. I'm sure that, if you called any of these contractors, they would know exactly what they'd eat, and they'd say they eat everything, because that was our experience. But
Purple loosestrife usually grows, in marshy areas, and if they don't cross streams, they might not like to go into the marsh.
yeah.
So somebody did say that goats don't like to cross streams, so they don't like their feet wet. They don't like their feet wet. Okay, you guys. Oh, this is what I was going to ask you, Kaitlin. You had said that they went in and ate some of the desirable vegetation that y'all wanted to keep there. Have you thought or tried or heard of any sort of protective? We have the tree tubes for trees and deer. Do you think there's anything that could protect the vegetation that we want while goats were doing their job?
Yeah, I think, if you had something that didn't have thick bark on it, like if you had a younger oak tree that you wanted to save, that was maybe only a couple inches diameter, I think a tree tube might help. It would definitely keep them from just going to town on it. But we're kind of just okay with cutting our losses and starting fresh and then letting them come back. And so I think that's just a consideration to have if you have any trees that you're willing to lose or any sort of special rare species. Maybe this isn't something you want to do, or maybe route the goats a little bit out of the way of this area where those plants might be. Because they climb on everything, they're jumping, they're moving. It's not even just the eating, it's like just their movement, and you have a lot of animals in one space, so there's going to be a lot of destruction that way.
Yeah, you have 100 of them with babies, so there's going to be some acting up, that's for sure.
Yeah.
No ivory soap or anything to deter them from eating those plants or anything, eh? I wanted to thank you guys for being here, and I wanted to thank our speakers, Ginny and Kaitlin, for being here and talking to us about alternatives, getting our juices flowing about how to talk to landowners about alternatives, the risks and some of the challenges for using these alternatives. So that was very helpful for us, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I wanted to thank all our participants for joining us on this 4-week, 8-webinar series. We did it, you guys, and we learned a lot. And we mentioned, you've heard us talk about the directory for green industry professionals, for service providers in Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. So the Woods in Your Backyard Partnership, that is the Department of Forestry in Virginia, Penn State Extension, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and University of Maryland, brought to you by Harry Hughes Center of Agroecology. The Woods in Your Backyard Partnership, they want to create a directory so that your business can be found by the landowners that want the services that we're talking about. Because as you know, there is a need for these services. So that will be coming up, on our end here in Maryland. We're just switching over our websites and stuff. So we're wanting to figure that out. I wanted to give you a heads up, though, that Virginia has a directory like that. So I want you all to keep your ears and your eyes peeled for emails from us that will encourage you to be on this a directory once we get it developed. So you're not done with the Woods in Your Backyard Partnership yet. Also, I wanted to give you a friendly reminder about the evaluation that we're going to be sending out in about a week. And I hope that you are enjoying the recordings of the sessions, that you find the handbook and checklist very helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact the people you registered with. We're happy to talk to you. We're so grateful that you all wanted to contribute your knowledge in our chats. And thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we hope that you'll join us for the next Woods in Your Backyard Partnership series when it comes up. Thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate it. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.